What part of the problem is we're not dealing with a human, we're dealing with psychopathic humans, and then we're dealing with a mind which is in fact not human, and it regards us as animals. And then you begin to think, well, how do we treat animals? And you get nervous. I get very nervous about this.
Well documented that the CIA tested the effects of LSD on hundreds of unsuspecting subjects in the 1950s, and that the government withheld treatment from black syphilis victims during the infamous Tuskegee experiment. Not so well known is that many other Americans were used as human guinea pigs. Our program reveals how government agencies exposed millions to toxic chemicals and radioactivity without permission, and, according to critics, without regard for the potential dangers. Declassified documents reveal that from the end of World War II through the Cold War, hidden under a veil of secrecy, the U.S. government performed military tests on large populations. In the late 40s and early 50s, patients were injected with a radioactive substance while in their hospital bed.
See, my father never told me. I never knew that this happened to him.
Soldiers were exposed to radiation to test their performance in a nuclear war. In the 1950s, the Army released bacteria and chemicals at sea, in the air, and underground.
I found out that 4 of my pals that lived directly across the street from me had all died of cancer. These are 4 separate families.
In 1995, a presidential advisory committee confirmed that for more than 3 decades, hundreds of thousands of Americans have been unwitting participants in human experimentation.
It is a very, very important piece of America's history, and it will shape America's future.
Terrible, and you are all being affected by this. You better wake up, look up, and realize what's being dumped upon us. Do your research and turn off the TVs, all of you. This is for real. Our own government, the United Nations, is making us sick, and you better wake up. You, sir doctor, you have a public responsibility to look into this instead of listen to this. This is terrible. I want some answers. Let's hear it. We're not going to respond. Why? Why won't you respond? This is the Public Health Board. I'm sick. You're supposed to help. Let's hear it. Who wants to drink the water? The DEQ says this is safe to drink. Does anybody want to drink some rainwater? Nobody's raising their hands. My time is up. My time might be up very soon, as well as many other people. You better really start using your noodle, what it was made for. Don't just watch TV and take this kind of propaganda to put down the research of scientists for 15 years.
Your record droughts, and then all of a sudden, it's been raining cats and dogs. What's happening?
Well, it's important to understand, George, that when the climate engineers control the spigot, they can turn it on and off as they wish. And for those that don't believe this can be done on this kind of a scale, they simply haven't done their research. When you fill the atmosphere with particulates, you affect the hydrological cycle dramatically. So we can speculate as to the agenda of why the spigot's been turned on in California. But the overall agenda, again, is much, much larger. If you look at our society and all the things people are concerned about, I would ask this. If we have powers around the world radically derailing Earth's life support systems, climate, life support systems, atmosphere, and if they damage that beyond the planet's ability to support life, will anything else matter at that point? And I would argue, obviously not. So in the case of California, it's much bigger than just California. We have things happening in both polar zones right now that are not being reported, incredibly radical. In fact, frontline data looks like we may have an ice-free Arctic at the end of this year or next. That's about 100 years ahead of schedule. And I know people are ranting coming ice age, global cooling. I do challenge anyone, and this is not about Al Gore and carbon credits, both of which are shams. I would challenge anyone to look at the frontline data, look at the temperatures we're seeing. George, did you happen to notice that 2 weeks ago in the middle of winter, Texas hit 107 degrees?
Oh, I know. It's crazy. St. Louis, it's been 70 almost all of February. It's crazy.
Exactly. The only reason we're having these radical cool downs because we had about a dozen instances of record high temperature to snow in less than 24 hours in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. That's because they're chemically ice nucleating wherever they have enough moisture to do so. So they're fire hosing moisture in from the west right now in a desperate attempt to create what amounts to a continental swamp cooler evaporative means of trying to chemically ice nucleate and cool things down. So you have a cool west now. You have the east frying. So to make clear to your listeners again, George, what this is all about, the most primary stated purpose for climate engineering, solar radiation management, to block the sun with light scattering particles because the planet is warming. And listen to what I'm saying right now because this is not a mistake. The planet's warming right now statistically at the thermal energy rate of 4 Hiroshima bombs per second. 400,000 per day. Challenge anyone. Look that up. Find the data. It's online. So if we go back to semantics, again, George, what I mentioned earlier about semantics being important.
Right.
Did you happen to see, George, the survey sometime back that was done by the main climate engineering disinformation source, Carnegie Science? Did you see the survey that said scientists state chemtrails aren't real? Did you see that?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Okay, let's look at that.
And I shook my head.
Okay, let's dissect that for a moment, if I may. Our legal team, the Legal Alliance to Stop Geoengineering, did a survey. We did a survey of our own, starting with the 77 scientists that participated in the, quote, chemtrails aren't real survey. And we added 1,430 more scientists to that list, and we publicized the whole list with the context, all the contacts for those individuals so people can verify its authenticity. Of those 1,500 scientists surveyed, including the 77 that participated in the chemtrails aren't real survey, not one, not a single one was willing to deny climate engineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection. Not one on the record. So when you use the science terms, now it's not so easy to deny. So of 1,500 scientists surveyed, not one was willing to deny the ongoing reality that's happening in our skies every day.
Dane, as they control, can they control intensity? And by that I mean, if they want it to rain, can they make it rain as much as they want, or is it out of control?
It's a bit of both. So when you have an atmosphere saturated with fine particulates, if those particulates coagulate, come together to form a large enough condensation nuclei, you can cause the precipitation to fall. But if you have too many small particulates that scatter, that can cause rainfall to be diminished. Let me give an example of that. 1992, Mount Pinatubo, not so large of an eruption, but the particulates that one eruption put into the atmosphere made 1992 by 50% the lowest rainfall year ever recorded to that point in time because of the particles in the atmosphere. So with manipulation with radio frequency transmissions, and depending on the polarization of the particles, they can cause them to coagulate or scatter, which means they can diminish rain or they can augment rainfall. So we see some astounding precipitation events. You remember some of the East Coast flooding that happened a year plus ago. We had 1,000-year floods there. So whatever the agenda is, again, we can speculate as to that, George, but whether or not they can control the spigot, there's absolutely no question. We see the Middle Eastern countries all droughted out. We see the destabilization that happened. We see sub-Saharan African countries droughted out for decades that have been forced to allow U.S. occupation on the ground. It's a weapon of war, and I could give more and more examples of weather warfare. George, in fact, I'm sure you know this, the president of the Philippines has asked the U.S. to get out.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wants us out.
So what's happened in the Philippines again and again, even through winter, record cyclones, cutting swaths.
Monsoons.
Over and over. And at the same time, in the U.S., we're now 11 plus years into a major hurricane drought in the U.S. People remember Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Matthew. Those were not...
What is 11 years? Something like that?
11-year major hurricane landfall drought. Remember Hurricane Matthew that happened not so long ago, that skirted the coast, that we had all the warnings it was going to devastate?
Right, that was going to be a head-on collision, and then it didn't happen.
There you go. And we said at Geoengineering Watch 6 days ahead of time, that hurricane would likely be kept just off the coast until it weakened, and then it wouldn't be allowed on shore. And that's exactly what happened. It came on shore at 75 miles per hour, bare minimum hurricane. Hurricane Sandy, people might think was a major hurricane. It was not. It was a Cat 1 hurricane.